She was only 7 years old when she first realized that music made her feel something different. It happened on a regular Tuesday evening. Her mother was cooking dinner in the kitchen, and the radio was playing some old song from the 90s. Most kids would have ignored it. But she stopped playing with her toys and just listened. The melody wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She didn't understand why, but tears started rolling down her cheeks. Not because she was sad, because something inside her had woken up. From that day forward, music became her secret world. She would sit by the window of their small apartment and hum melodies she made up in her head. Her family lived above a laundromat in a busy part of the city. The sounds of washing machines and people talking never bothered her. She learned to find rhythm in everything. The spinning of the dryers, the footsteps on the stairs, the rain hitting the window glass. To her, the whole world was singing if you just knew how to listen. Her parents worked long hours to keep the family going. Her father drove a taxi from early morning until late at night. Her mother worked at the laundromat downstairs and also took sewing jobs on the side. They were good people who loved their daughter deeply, but they didn't have time to notice her musical gifts. When she hummed her little songs, they would smile and nod, but their minds were always somewhere else. Bills to pay, rent due next week, the landlord complaining again. She never blamed them for not seeing what lived inside her. She understood even as a child that survival came first. Dreams were a luxury that people like her family couldn't always afford. When she turned 12, something important happened. Her school was throwing away an old keyboard that had been sitting in the music room for years. Half the keys didn't work properly, and the sound was scratchy and weak. But when she saw it sitting by the dumpster after school, her heart nearly jumped out of her chest. She ran home and begged her father to help her carry it upstairs. He looked at her with tired eyes, but couldn't say no to the excitement on her face. That broken keyboard became her most prized possession. She would spend hours figuring out which keys still worked and creating melodies around the broken ones. She taught herself by watching videos on an old phone with a cracked screen. She didn't have money for lessons. She didn't have a teacher, but she had something that no amount of money could buy. She had hunger. She had passion. She had a fire burning inside her that refused to go out. By the time she reached high school, music had become her entire identity. She would stay up past midnight practicing, keeping the volume low so she wouldn't wake her parents. Her fingers moved across those damaged keys like they were extensions of her soul. She started writing her own songs, simple ones at first, songs about the view from her window, songs about the old man who fed pigeons in the park every morning, songs about feeling invisible in a world that seemed to move too fast. Her classmates didn't know about her hidden talent. At school, she was the quiet girl who sat in the back of the class. She didn't have many friends, she wasn't popular, she wasn't the type of person anyone noticed, and honestly, she preferred it that way. Her music was her private treasure, something that belonged only to her. But everything changed during her junior year when the school announced its annual talent showcase. This wasn't just any school event. It was the biggest night of the year. Students from all grades competed for a chance to perform on the main stage. Winners got scholarship recommendations. Talent scouts sometimes showed up. For someone like her, it could be a door to a completely different life. For weeks, she debated whether to audition. Part of her was terrified. What if people laughed at her? What if she wasn't as good as she thought? What if her dreams were just foolish fantasies? But another part of her knew that she would regret it forever if she didn't at least try. So she gathered every ounce of courage she had and signed up. The audition was held in the school auditorium on a gray Wednesday afternoon. She walked in carrying sheets of paper with the song she had written. Her hands were shaking. Her mouth was dry. The auditorium felt enormous, even though only 4 judges sat at a table near the front. They were all music teachers, led by the choir director, a woman known for her sharp tongue and impossibly high standards. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano on stage. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The song was called Ordinary. She had written it about her life, about feeling like nobody in a world full of somebodies, about finding beauty in small moments that most people overlooked. Her voice wasn't perfect. It cracked a little on the high notes. But it was real. It was honest. It came from somewhere deep inside her. She was only halfway through when the choir director raised her hand. "That's enough," the woman said. She stopped playing. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. "Thank you for coming in," the choir director continued, her voice flat and uninterested. "But we're looking for students with formal training. This showcase represents our school. We need performers who can deliver at a professional level." She sat there, frozen, unable to move. "Do you have any training?" one of the other judges asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "No," she whispered. "I taught myself." The judges exchanged glances. One of them actually smirked. "Self-taught," the choir director repeated, as if the words themselves were somehow ridiculous. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, dear, but enthusiasm isn't enough. Perhaps you should consider taking some classes before trying again next year." She gathered her papers and walked off the stage. The walk back through the auditorium felt like the longest journey of her life. She could feel their eyes on her back. She could hear someone whisper something that made another person laugh quietly. By the time she reached the hallway, the tears had started falling. She rushed to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall. For 20 minutes, she sat there and cried, not just because of the rejection, but because for a moment she had allowed herself to hope. And hope, when it gets crushed, leaves the sharpest wounds. The news spread quickly through school. The quiet girl from the back of class had tried to audition for the talent show and been dismissed before she could even finish her song. Some students felt sorry for her, but others weren't so kind. "Maybe she should stick to whatever her family does," one girl said loudly in the hallway, making sure she could hear. "Not everyone is meant to be on stage." She kept her head down and kept walking. That night, she sat in her room staring at the old keyboard. Part of her wanted to push it out the window. Part of her wanted to never touch it again. The rejection had cut deep. The laughter had cut deeper. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was just a foolish girl with foolish dreams. But then something strange happened. Her fingers, almost without her permission, began to move across the keys. She started playing. Not one of her prepared songs, something new, something raw, something that poured out of her like blood from a wound. The melody was sad and angry and beautiful all at once. She played until her fingers hurt. She played until the tears dried on her cheeks. She played until the sun started coming up outside her window. And somewhere in those dark hours, she made a decision. They could laugh at her. They could dismiss her. They could tell her she wasn't good enough. But they couldn't make her stop. They couldn't take away the music that lived inside her. She would prove them wrong. She didn't know how yet. She didn't know when. But she knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The months after the audition were some of the hardest of her life. She went to school every day with her head down, trying to be invisible. The whispers had mostly stopped, but the memory of that day still burned inside her chest. Every time she passed the auditorium, her stomach would tighten. Every time she saw the choir director in the hallway, she would look the other way. But she kept her promise to herself. Every night, after her homework was done and her parents had gone to sleep, she would sit at her keyboard and play. The music became her therapy. It became her escape. It became the only place where she felt like she truly existed. She graduated high school without anyone knowing about her talent. She didn't try out for anything else. She didn't perform at any events. She just survived, got her diploma, smiled for the photos. and walked away from that building knowing she would never look back. The real world hit her fast and hard. Her family couldn't afford to send her to college, especially not for something as risky as music. Her father sat her down one evening and explained the situation gently. They had nothing saved. They were already struggling to pay rent. The best thing she could do was find a job and help support the family. She understood. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded and started looking for work the next morning. She found a job at a small coffee shop about 20 minutes from her apartment. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. She worked the morning shift, waking up at 5 to catch the first bus. She made coffee, cleaned tables, smiled at customers, and tried not to think about the dreams she had put on hold. But the music never left her. It couldn't. It was part of who she was. On her days off, she started exploring ways to share her songs with the world. She had heard about people becoming famous through the internet, uploading videos that went viral overnight. Maybe that could be her path. Maybe she didn't need fancy schools or important connections. Maybe all she needed was one video that reached the right person. She saved up for 3 months and bought a cheap microphone. She set up her phone on a stack of books and recorded herself playing one of her original songs. Her hands were shaking the whole time. Her voice cracked twice, but she uploaded it anyway. The first few days, nothing happened. 10 views, then 20, then 50. She checked the video obsessively, refreshing the page every few hours. When comments finally started coming in, she felt her heart racing with excitement. But the excitement didn't last long. "Is this supposed to be good?" one comment said. "Girl needs to take some lessons before posting this stuff," said another. "Amateur hour, next. Why do people think they can sing just because they have a phone?" She read every single comment. She knew she shouldn't. She knew it would only hurt. But she couldn't stop herself. Each negative word felt like a knife sliding between her ribs. She had poured her heart into that song. She had shared something deeply personal, and strangers on the internet were tearing it apart like it meant nothing. She deleted the video after a week. For a while, she stopped trying. She went to work, came home, and sat in silence. The keyboard gathered dust in the corner of her room. Her mother noticed something was wrong and asked if she was okay. She just smiled and said she was tired. What else could she say? That she had tried to chase her dream and failed. That the world had confirmed what everyone had always told her? But giving up on music was like giving up on breathing. No matter how hard she tried to walk away, it kept pulling her back. A few months later, she heard about a local talent competition happening at a community center across town. The prize wasn't much, just a small amount of money and a chance to perform at a local festival. But something about it sparked a tiny flame of hope inside her. Maybe this was different. Maybe in person people would actually listen. Maybe they would hear what she was trying to say. She practiced for 2 weeks straight. She chose her best song, the one she had written about her grandmother who had passed away the year before. It was called Her Hands. It was about all the sacrifices her grandmother had made, all the love she had given without ever asking for anything in return. Every time she played it, she could feel her grandmother's presence in the room. The night of the competition, she arrived early. The community center was small and smelled like old carpet. About 30 people were scattered across folding chairs. A makeshift stage had been set up at the front with a single microphone and a keyboard that looked even older than hers. She watched the other performers go before her. Some were good, some were not. But all of them had something she didn't. Confidence. They walked on stage like they belonged there. They smiled at the crowd like they had done this 100 times. She felt her courage shrinking with every passing minute. When they called her name, her legs almost refused to move. She walked to the stage like she was walking through water. She sat at the keyboard. She looked out at the small crowd, and she froze. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. She could see people shifting in their seats. Someone coughed. Someone whispered something to the person next to them. Finally, she forced her fingers to move. She started playing, but something was wrong. Her hands were trembling too much. She hit a wrong note, then another. Her voice came out thin and weak, nothing like how it sounded when she practiced alone in her room. The song that was supposed to honor her grandmother's memory sounded broken and lost. She made it through to the end somehow. When she finished, there was a smattering of polite applause. Nothing more. She walked off the stage with her eyes burning, refusing to let the tears fall until she was outside. She didn't win. She didn't even place. The judges gave her feedback that was meant to be kind, but felt like salt in an open wound. Nice effort. Keep practicing. Maybe try some vocal training. Standing alone at the bus stop that night, she felt something inside her crack. This wasn't just one rejection. This was a pattern. The school had said no. The internet had said no. Now this small community competition had said no. How many times could one person be told they weren't good enough before they started to believe it? The bus ride home was the loneliest 30 minutes of her life. She stared out the window at the passing streetlights and asked herself the question she had been avoiding for years. What if they were all right? What if she simply didn't have what it takes? What if the music she heard inside herself was just noise to everyone else? When she got home, her parents were already asleep. She walked into her room and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark. The keyboard sat in the corner, waiting for her like it always did, but for the first time she didn't want to touch it. She didn't want to play. She didn't want to feel. She lay down and stared at the ceiling. The dreams she had carried since she was 7 years old felt impossibly heavy. Maybe it was time to let them go. Maybe it was time to accept that some people were meant to shine and others were meant to watch from the shadows. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. But even in the silence, she could hear melodies playing in her mind, songs that had never been sung, stories that had never been told, a voice inside her that refused to be quiet, no matter how many times the world tried to silence it, and somewhere deep down, beneath all the pain and doubt and exhaustion, a tiny spark still glowed. Faint, flickering, but alive. She just didn't know it yet. 3 months passed after the talent competition disaster. She had stopped practicing. The keyboard in her room was now buried under a pile of clothes. She told herself she was just taking a break, but deep down, she knew the truth. She was giving up. Her days became a gray routine. Wake up early, catch the bus, make coffee for strangers, smile even when she didn't feel like smiling, go home. Eat dinner with her parents, watch television until her eyes got heavy, sleep, repeat. The spark that had once burned so brightly inside her was fading. She could feel it dying a little more each day. And the worst part was, she didn't know how to stop it. At the coffee shop, she had become friends with one of her co-workers. She was a cheerful woman in her mid-30s who always had a kind word for everyone. They would chat during slow hours about life, dreams, and everything in between. Her co-worker knew about her love for music because she had mentioned it once, months ago, but she never brought it up again after that. One Tuesday afternoon, while they were restocking cups behind the counter, her co-worker mentioned something that changed everything. "Hey, I meant to tell you," she said casually, not even looking up from the stack of cups in her hands. "My cousin is organizing this charity event next weekend. It's for a children's hospital. They had a singer lined up, but she canceled last minute. Some kind of family emergency." She nodded politely, not really paying attention. "That's too bad." "Yeah, they're kind of desperate now. It's nothing fancy, just like 50 people at a community hall. But they really want some live music to make it feel special for the donors." Her co-worker paused and looked at her. "You still play, right? You should do it." She almost laughed. "Me? No, I'm not. I haven't played in months." "So? It's not like they're looking for a superstar. They just need someone who can play a few songs and make the evening nice. you'd be helping sick kids. And honestly, my cousin is losing her mind trying to find someone last minute." She shook her head automatically. "I don't think I'm the right person." Her coworker shrugged and went back to stacking cups. "Okay, no pressure, just thought I'd ask. Let me know if you change your mind." That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The offer replayed in her head over and over again. 50 people, a community hall, nothing fancy, just a small charity event that most people would forget about by the next morning. But that was exactly why she couldn't stop thinking about it. There were no judges waiting to tear her apart, no comments section full of cruel strangers, no competition where she would be compared to others. Just a room full of people gathered for a good cause who needed some music to fill the silence. For the first time in months, she walked over to her keyboard and pulled the clothes off it. She sat down on the edge of her bed and placed her fingers on the keys. They felt unfamiliar now, like visiting a house she used to live in. She pressed a key. The sound rang out in her small room, hanging in the air for a moment before fading. Then she pressed another, and another. Before she knew it, she was playing. Nothing complicated. Just simple chords that came back to her like old friends. And then something unexpected happened. She started to cry, not from sadness this time, but from relief. The music was still there. It had been waiting for her all along. The next morning, she told her coworker she would do it. "Really?" Her coworker's face lit up. "Oh my gosh, my cousin is going to be so happy. Thank you so much. You're literally saving the event." She forced a smile even though her stomach was already twisting with nerves. "It's no big deal. Just a few songs, right?" "Exactly. Nothing to worry about." But she was worried. She was terrified. The moment she agreed, the old fears came rushing back. What if she froze again like at the competition? What if people stared at her with disappointment? What if this was just another failure waiting to happen? She had 2 weeks to prepare. 2 weeks to get ready for something she hadn't done in months. It wasn't much time, but it was all she had. She started practicing again that same night. At first, her fingers stumbled over notes they used to know by heart. Her voice was rusty and uncertain, but she pushed through. Every night after work, she sat at that keyboard and played until her hands ached. She decided not to perform any covers or popular songs. She wanted to play something original, something that came from her own heart. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it her way. There was one song she had written during her darkest moments. It was called "Still Rising." She had never played it for anyone before. It was too personal, too raw. It talked about all the times she had been knocked down and all the times she had forced herself to get back up. It talked about feeling invisible and unworthy. It talked about the tiny flame inside her that refused to die no matter how many storms tried to put it out. Every time she practiced it, she felt something powerful moving through her. The song wasn't just music. It was her story. It was everything she had been through compressed into 4 minutes of melody and words. The night before the charity event, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible thing that could go wrong. Her mind was a tornado of worst-case scenarios. She imagined forgetting the lyrics. She imagined her voice cracking. She imagined people looking at their phones, bored and uninterested. Around 2 in the morning, she finally got up and walked to the window. The city below was quiet. A few cars passed by. A stray cat wandered across the empty street. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. She thought about all the moments that had led her here. The little girl who cried the first time she heard music on the radio. The teenager who carried home a broken keyboard from a dumpster. The young woman who had been laughed at, rejected, and dismissed more times than she could count. And yet here she was, still standing, still trying. Maybe that was the point. Maybe success wasn't about never falling down. Maybe it was about getting up one more time than you fell. Maybe it was about refusing to let the world decide your worth. She took a deep breath and made a decision. Tomorrow, she wasn't going to perform for the audience. She wasn't going to perform for approval or applause. She was going to perform for herself, for the 7-year-old girl who first fell in love with music, for the teenager who practiced on broken keys until midnight, for every version of herself that had been told she wasn't good enough. This time, she wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. She just wanted to let the music out. She went back to bed and finally fell asleep. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't dream about failure. She dreamed about flying. The day of the charity event arrived faster than she expected. She woke up with her heart already pounding. The morning light coming through her window felt different somehow. Brighter, sharper, like the world knew something important was about to happen. She spent the first hour just sitting on the edge of her bed, trying to calm her nerves. Her hands were trembling slightly. Her stomach felt like it was filled with rocks. Every few minutes, she would glance at the keyboard in the corner and feel a wave of panic wash over her. What if she wasn't ready? What if she made a fool of herself again? What if this was just another chapter in a long book of failures? She shook her head and forced herself to stand up. No. She had made a promise to herself. Tonight wasn't about proving anything. Tonight was about letting the music out. Whatever happened after that was out of her control. She spent the afternoon getting ready. She didn't have fancy clothes, so she wore a simple black dress that her mother had bought her for a family wedding 2 years ago. She looked at herself in the small mirror hanging on her closet door. The girl staring back at her looked scared. But there was something else in her eyes, too. Something that hadn't been there for a long time. Hope. Her coworker had arranged for someone to pick her up. A car arrived around 6 in the evening. The drive to the community hall took about 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. She watched the city pass by outside the window, her fingers tapping nervously against her knee. When they arrived, she felt her breath catch in her throat. The community hall was a modest building with brick walls and large windows. Nothing fancy, just like her coworker had said. But to her, it looked like a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. She walked inside and was greeted by her coworker's cousin, a friendly woman with short hair and a warm smile. She thanked her over and over again for stepping in at the last minute. She showed her around the hall, pointing out where the small stage was set up and where the keyboard had been placed. The room was decorated with simple streamers and banners that said, "Hope for Little Hearts." Photos of children from the hospital lined one of the walls, smiling faces. Brave little souls fighting battles no child should have to fight. Looking at those photos, she felt something shift inside her. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about them. Guests started arriving around 7. She watched from a corner as the room slowly filled with people, men in suits, women in elegant dresses, everyone chatting and laughing, holding glasses of wine and small plates of food. They all looked so polished, so confident, so different from her. She felt invisible again, just like in high school, just like at the talent competition. A small voice in her head whispered that she didn't belong here, that she should leave before anyone noticed she was gone. But she stayed. The event officially started with a speech from the hospital director. He talked about the children they were helping and the difference the donations would make. People clapped and nodded. A few wiped tears from their eyes. Then her coworker's cousin took the microphone and introduced her. And now, we have a very special treat for you all tonight. A talented young musician who has graciously agreed to perform for us. Please give her a warm welcome. The applause was polite, but scattered. Most people were still talking among themselves, not really paying attention. A few glanced toward the stage with mild curiosity before returning to their conversations. She was just background music to them, something to fill the silence while they enjoyed their evening. She walked to the stage on legs that felt like they might collapse at any moment. The keyboard was waiting for her, simple and unassuming. She sat down on the small bench and looked out at the crowd. Most of them weren't even looking at her. They were busy with their drinks, their food, their conversations. For a moment, panic seized her chest. This was it. This was where she would freeze again. This was where everything would fall apart. But then she remembered the photos on the wall, the children with their brave smiles. She remembered why she was here, and she remembered the promise she had made to herself the night before. She closed her eyes, she took a deep breath, and she began to play. The first notes of Still Rising floated out into the room, soft, gentle, almost like a whisper. She kept her eyes closed, blocking out the noise, blocking out the crowd, blocking out everything except the music flowing through her fingertips. And then she started to sing. Her voice was quiet at first, uncertain, but with each word it grew stronger. The lyrics poured out of her like water breaking through a dam. All the pain, all the rejection, all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, all the times she had wanted to give up but didn't. It was all there in that song. Something strange started happening in the room. The conversations began to fade. One by one, people stopped talking. Glasses were set down on tables. Forks paused in midair. Heads turned toward the stage. She didn't notice at first. Her eyes were still closed. She was lost in the music, lost in the story she was telling. But the silence in the room grew deeper with every passing second. A silence not of boredom, but of attention, of connection, of something being felt. By the time she reached the chorus, the entire room had gone still. 50 people stood frozen, watching this unknown girl pour her heart out on a small stage in a community hall. Some of them had tears forming in their eyes. Others had their hands pressed to their chests, like they were trying to hold something in. She opened her eyes for just a moment and saw them, really saw them. And for the first time in her life, she felt seen in return. The final verse came, and her voice swelled with emotion she didn't even know she had left. The words spoke of rising after falling, of finding light in the darkest places, of refusing to let the world break you no matter how hard it tried. When she played the last note, it hung in the air like a question waiting to be answered. She lifted her fingers from the keys and sat in the silence. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the room exploded. People rose to their feet. The applause was deafening. It wasn't polite clapping this time. It was something raw and real. People were cheering. Some were crying openly, not even trying to hide their tears. A woman in the front row was sobbing into her napkin. A man near the back was shaking his head in disbelief, clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. She sat there, stunned, unable to process what was happening. This wasn't like anything she had ever experienced. This wasn't rejection. This wasn't laughter. This was something she had dreamed about but never truly believed could happen. Someone shouted for an encore. Others joined in. The chant spread through the room until it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating. She didn't know what to do, so she did the only thing she knew how to do. She played another song, and they listened, every single one of them. They listened like her music was the only thing in the world that mattered. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that sitting in the back of the room was a woman who had come to support her friend's charity. A woman who had spent 30 years in the music industry. A woman who had discovered some of the biggest names in the business. And this woman hadn't taken her eyes off the stage from the moment the first note was played. After the second song ended, she stood up from the keyboard on shaky legs. The applause was still ringing in her ears. People were coming toward the stage, wanting to shake her hand, wanting to tell her how much her music had moved them. She smiled and nodded and said, "Thank you so many times," the words started to lose meaning. She felt like she was floating outside her own body, watching everything happen to someone else. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her, girls who grew up above laundromats, girls who taught themselves on broken keyboards, girls who had been told over and over again that they weren't good enough. But it was real. Every handshake, every tear-streaked face, every person who looked at her like she had given them something precious. She was making her way through the crowd when she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned around and found herself face to face with a woman she didn't recognize. She looked to be in her 50s, with silver streaks in her dark hair and kind eyes that seemed to see right through her. "That was extraordinary," the woman said simply. She didn't know how to respond. "Thank you," she managed. The woman smiled and reached into her purse, pulling out a small business card. "I'd like you to call me tomorrow. If you're interested in taking your music seriously, I think I can help." She took the card with trembling fingers. The name on it meant nothing to her at the time, but underneath the name were two words that made her heart stop. Music producer. She looked up, but the woman was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd like she had never been there at all. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed holding the business card, turning it over and over in her hands. Part of her was convinced this was some kind of joke, a cruel prank. Tomorrow she would call the number and someone would laugh at her. That's how these things always went, wasn't it? But another part of her, the part that had written songs in the dark and played through the pain and refused to give up even when giving up would have been so much easier, that part whispered something different. What if this is real? The next morning, she made the call. The woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm and professional. She explained that she had been in the music industry for over 3 decades. She had worked with artists whose names were known all over the world. She had an ear for talent, she said, and last night she had heard something special. "I'm not promising you fame," the woman said honestly. "This industry is brutal, but I believe in your voice. I believe in your songs, and I'd like to work with you to see how far we can take this." She was crying by the time the call ended. Not sad tears, not even happy tears exactly. Just release. Years and years of holding everything inside, finally letting go. Over the next few months, her life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The woman became her mentor, guiding her through the complicated world of the music business. They worked together on refining her sound, not changing it, but polishing it until it shone. The woman kept telling her that her rawness was her strength. Her authenticity was what made people connect. They weren't going to manufacture her into something fake. They were going to let her be exactly who she was. She recorded her first single in a real studio. The song was "Still Rising," the same song she had played at the charity event, the same song she had written during her darkest moments. Sitting in that studio, wearing headphones and singing into a professional microphone, she thought about all the nights she had practiced in her tiny room with her broken keyboard. She thought about all the people who had told her she would never make it, and she smiled. The single was released quietly at first. No big marketing campaign, no celebrity endorsements, just her song out there in the world, hoping to find ears that needed to hear it. What happened next was something nobody expected. Someone with a large following online happened to hear the song at a dinner party. They shared a clip of it with a simple caption. "This broke me in the best way." Within hours, that clip had been shared thousands of times. Within days, it had been shared millions of times. People all over the world were discovering her music. They were leaving comments about how the song had made them cry, how it had given them hope, how it had made them feel less alone. Messages started pouring in from every corner of the globe. A teenager in another country wrote that the song had stopped her from giving up on her dreams. A man who had lost his job wrote that it had given him the strength to keep going. A mother wrote that she played it for her daughter every night before bed to teach her about resilience. She read every single message, and with each one, she understood something important. Her music wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough, everyone who had ever been laughed at, everyone who had ever felt invisible. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Interviews, magazine features, a record deal with a real label. Her face on billboards she used to walk past without a second glance. It was overwhelming and terrifying and beautiful all at once. But through it all, she never forgot where she came from. One afternoon, she received an unexpected email. It was from her old high school. They were inviting her to perform at the annual talent showcase, the same showcase she had been rejected from years ago. The choir director had personally requested her presence. She could have said no. She could have ignored them. After everything they had put her through, nobody would have blamed her, but she said yes. Walking back into that auditorium felt like stepping into a time machine. The same stage, the same seats, the same smell of wood polish and old curtains. But everything was different now. She was different now. The auditorium was packed. Students filled every seat, many of them holding their phones up to record. Teachers lined the walls, and there in the front row sat the choir director, the same woman who had cut her off mid-song and told her she needed training. She walked to the piano and sat down. The room fell silent. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked out at all those young faces staring back at her. Kids who reminded her of herself. Kids with dreams they were probably afraid to share. Kids who had maybe been told that their dreams were foolish. Then she spoke. A few years ago, I stood on this exact stage. I auditioned for this exact showcase, and I was told I wasn't good enough. She paused, letting the words sink in. They told me I needed training. They told me to come back when I was ready. But here's what I learned since then. Readiness isn't something other people get to decide for you. Talent isn't just about technique. It's about the truth you carry inside and the courage to share it. She placed her fingers on the keys. Never let anyone silence your song. And then she played. The same song she had tried to play all those years ago, the one they had cut short. Only this time, she played it all the way through. And this time, when she finished, the room didn't just clap. They roared. In the front row, the choir director was crying. After the performance, she found the woman waiting backstage. The choir director looked older now, smaller somehow. She apologized with tears streaming down her face. She said she had been wrong. She said she had almost destroyed something beautiful. She listened. And then she did something that surprised even herself. She hugged her. "Thank you," she said softly. "If you hadn't rejected me, I might never have fought so hard to prove that music was my destiny." She walked out of that school building into the afternoon sunlight. The same street, the same trees, the same world. But she was no longer the invisible girl from the back of the class. She was someone who had risen, and she was just getting started.